This episode is brought to you by Freaky Folklore, the podcast which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries. Learn about what the Goat Man is, discover where Siren Head came from, and dive into the unsolved mystery of Dyatlov Pass. Just follow and rate Freaky Folklore on your favorite podcasting app, or go to eeriecast.com. That's EERIE cast.com. Up in the mountains, your screams will echo for miles, but there will be no one around to hear you scream. Today's episode features disturbing experiences and encounters in the mountains. Enjoy, and remember to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org if you want to have them narrated. Did you guys have a good New Year? Let me know in the comments if you did anything interesting to celebrate. My wife and I just watched Prisoner of Azkaban, and I tried to explain to her how there's a subgenre of movie called comfycore, which in my opinion several of the Harry Potter movies belong to that subgenre. Anyway, enough yapping. Let's begin. Something in the Colorado Cabin, from JustsomerandomTexan. Back in August, my friend group and I went on a road trip to an Airbnb cabin hidden in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. It was a very small town, which took less than 5 seconds to pass on the highway. Because of this, we actually missed our turn at first, because it was the only intersection in the entire town, and it wasn't marked at all. Our cabin was 30 minutes down winding dirt roads, hidden in some woods. It was an older, but still very beautiful 3-story log cabin. Originally, there were going to be more than 10 of us, but some of us got the Rona and others had to stay home for work. So in the end, only about 7 people were in the cabin. Weird things quickly began as we were settling in. We heard footsteps coming from areas where none of us were. Doors opened and closed on their own. We tried not to think too much of it, rationalizing it as wind or drafts. After all, we had doors open, carrying stuff in from our cars. If it wasn't that, then maybe it was some animals on the roof or something. Later that night, we were all smoking and drinking, just like a bunch of 19 to 22-year-olds would on an unsupervised trip to Colorado. That's when things got even more interesting. Doors slamming, what sounded like whispers coming from empty rooms, and even more footsteps. By then, we were starting to get freaked out a little bit, but again, we tried to explain it away. Maybe we were hearing other people at cabins down the road. We knew they were there because we'd seen them walking out earlier, and we'd passed by their cabins on the way to ours. The second day, we'd gone exploring. I brought a camera with me and caught a couple of odd shadows, but those may have been just tricks of the light filtering down through the trees. But the woods itself gave off a very strange and unsettling vibe, like something was off. A few spots in the cabin had the same energy. That night was about the same. Smoking and drinking, footsteps, voices, and doors. The third day is when things started getting a little more strange. A few incidents happened. One of us, Ricky, went out exploring again with Ethan, another one of our group. We'd made a very strict rule that no one was to venture out alone, not even by car. They ended up getting separated, and Ethan came back first, saying he didn't know where Ricky was. Then Ricky showed up, saying he had fought a snake and almost lost. We got on them about getting separated, but we ended up joking with Ricky, saying that he almost lost to a tiny snake. He did admit it was only a small garter snake. Later on, a more serious incident happened. Sarah, one of the girls in our group, was slicing limes for drink mixers and cut a slice off the tip of her thumb. But from the way everyone screamed, you'd think she had cut off her whole thumb. That's what I actually thought, so I kept suggesting we call an ambulance, until I learned how small it was. She got over it quick. Later on, she ended up chasing Brooke, the other girl who's very squeamish about injuries, trying to shove her cut thumb in her face. What happened a couple of hours later, though, was really what made the night scary. Ricky was on the ground floor by himself, picking up a few things after we'd had a big game of pool in the game room. Suddenly, we heard him scream.
"What the heck was that?"
We all ran downstairs to see what had scared him. We found Ricky staring at the door to the laundry room, which was one of those rooms that had a strange vibe, and we'd heard other sounds coming from it. He explained that he'd heard a girl's voice coming from inside that room. Then we all heard another sound, like a voice. We all went quiet, listening closely. I got out my phone and I began to record. A few seconds later, we clearly heard a girl's voice say, "Hello." Although it came out rather quiet in the video. The video will be linked in the description if you want to hear it. Now, of course, we all go absolutely nuts because we know for a fact that no one was in that room. We were just in there not 15 minutes earlier. We all began to storm up the stairs, and Jack, Sarah's boyfriend, actually pushes Sarah and Matthew, another guy on the trip, behind him so he can get up the stairs faster. Now we're all understandably terrified at this point. Matthew just kinda sits down on the floor in shock. Brooke tries to rationalize it, saying if it's another one of Sarah's tricks, she's walking right out the door. Sarah's known for pulling pranks on us. Harmless ones, though. We then hear Ricky in the background saying, "I'm about to throw some hands," although I'm not sure who he thinks he's going to fight. A ghost? Good luck with that. Brooke goes back downstairs, and the video ends there. But she hears the voice again and comes screaming back up the stairs. We pour some drinks and smoke some, trying to forget what happened by talking to some coyotes we hear out in the woods while sitting on the balcony. The following day, another incident happens. Ricky makes the dumb decision to leave and explore the woods by himself, while the rest of us are still sleeping. My room was on the ground floor, by the way, less than 20 feet from the laundry room. The rest of us wake up and understandably get very worried. Before long, we get ready to go search for him, but then he walks back in the cabin. His jacket is torn, and he's got some small cuts and bruises. We absolutely go off on him for breaking our golden rule. Turns out he'd gone out to record a TikTok and slipped on a cliff. He would have died if he hadn't miraculously grabbed onto a tree root and a rock. The drop would have been about 150 feet onto solid rocks. We were sitting there thinking our trip had been cursed because weird stuff keeps happening. The rest of the day goes by pretty smoothly. Normal footstep sounds and doors doing their thing. But that night, more than once, we caught Ricky on the ground floor seemingly flirting with someone, but he actively denies it, even now. But he was saying things like, "I really like you," and "I'm sure you're beautiful," to something that wasn't there. He didn't have his phone on him at the time either, and he wasn't wearing AirPods. We think he was trying to flirt with the ghost, or something paranormal was just messing with his mind. The 5th day, which was our last full day there, was a big adventure. 5 of us went to a park to check out an alpine slide. Really fun, it's called Winter Park by the way, and I highly recommend it. Matthew and Ethan stay back for 2 reasons. 1, they couldn't afford admission. And 2, they were starting to get the cabin ready for us to leave. The 5 of us that were going piled into my little coupe. The only other car was Ethan's, and we set off through the mountains. This time we paid attention to the amount of sheer drops out there, always on one side of the road. At one point, we were at a spot with a particularly long drop off our left side, when suddenly around a near blind corner, there are a few mountain goats standing in the road. I slammed on my brakes and began to lose control of the car. My car was older and didn't have anti-lock brakes. We were sliding right towards that huge drop, but thankfully, I got the vehicle to stop. Our discussion then went back to how the trip felt. Cursed, because none of the cars we passed that were driving the opposite direction had tried to warn us about the goats. Anyway, we finally got to the place and had some fun. Then we went back to the cabin without any further incidents. That night, our last night, we had a big smoke session and some jello shots, and I was outside with my camera on a tripod, taking some night sky shots, which turned out pretty well in my opinion. That was when I glanced at the cabin, and I swear to God, I saw the pale face of a girl, a face that did not belong to any of my friends. It was looking at me from my bedroom window. I rubbed my eyes, and when I looked back, she was gone. I went inside to investigate, completely forgetting my camera. I didn't see anything, so I then went back to the group to finish our little party. Other than seeing the girl, no more major paranormal things happened that night. The next morning, we got packed to leave, and I, being the only Christian of the group, said a small prayer and told any entities in the cabin that they weren't allowed to come home with us. Nothing had felt demonic or evil up to that point, but there was that feeling that something was wrong. A couple of us swear to have actually heard a voice say goodbye as we were walking out the door for the last time. Overall, this was the most terrifying, but also the most fun experience of my life. But even after only a few weeks, the experience felt like a fever dream. We do plan on going back one winter to be able to go skiing and to see the mountains covered in snow. If we stay at the same cabin, I'll be bringing some ghost hunting gear with us, namely an EVP recorder, thermal camera, a cheap digital camera that's not my expensive rig, EMF detector, and maybe a spirit box. I'll post another story if anything happens on the trip. Never go to Yellowstone. From notgoingtoworksrry. I'm a 22-year-old guy, and I don't really know where to post this, but I thought it would be as good a place as any. It all started on a road trip through the national parks out west. My friends, some guys the same age, and I wanted a fun way to celebrate graduating from college, especially after such a crazy year, getting sent home during our final semester due to the Rona and graduating online. We hoped that some fresh air would rejuvenate us before we started real adult life in our jobs. We'd all decided to meet at our favorite bar near our college for one final drink to reminisce about the great times we had. We drove around the eerily empty campus. There wasn't a soul in sight. This probably should have just been a sign for us to cancel, as the Rona certainly wasn't showing any signs of stopping, but we ignored it. We were simply too excited. About 160 miles into our trip, we ran into our first of many problems. The car began to overheat. Don't get me wrong, it was a newer BMW, so we didn't think that anything like this was going to happen. But German cars will be German cars. We took it to an auto shop and got it fixed in a couple of hours, as it was an easy coolant leak, and it just needed a new hose. This was another sign that we all just chose to overlook. Oh, how I wish we would have just cut our losses and gone home at this point. Nevertheless, we trekked on, driving another few hundred miles without any issues. We were all so excited, singing our favorite songs, playing random apps to pass the time, and judging random girls on Tinder that we matched with along the way. However, it was around St. Louis that we would run into our second problem: a flat tire. Once again, we ignored this sign and pulled into a random tire shop, got it fixed, and we were on our way once again. After 2 days of driving, we finally reached Denver. We saw this as a great point to stop for a day and enjoy the city. While it was still pretty much shut down, we still made the most of our time there. The next day, we continued on, hoping to reach Yellowstone by night, but we would run into another big issue. We popped yet another tire. Again, we were near a city, Casper, Wyoming, so we were able to get it fixed quickly and continue our trip the next day. This should have been the final straw. We should have turned back. We'd already blown through most of our budget just from fixing the car. However, we thought, we've already made it this far, what else can go wrong? Oh, how wrong we were. When we pulled into the campsite the next day, we eagerly set up our tents and went on a quick hike. Somehow, we were the only ones at our campsite, as it seemed people were still staying home from the Rona. At the time, we saw this as a massive plus, because to us it meant we could get as drunk and rowdy as we wanted to that night. And as the sun set, that's just what we did. However, something felt off the whole time. You know that feeling you get when you walk in the woods late at night, and you just feel like you aren't alone? Like someone or something is watching you. Like you don't belong there, and you're intruding on something else's territory. That's exactly how I felt the entire time. So while my friends were getting blasted, I built as big a fire as I could, hoping to give myself a sense of safety and ease my anxiousness. Once I finished, however, a feeling of dread washed over me. I'd never felt so scared in my entire life. It came out of nowhere without any explanation. I decided to call it a night after this, hoping that I could just sleep it off while my friends carelessly drank and played loud music that echoed throughout the valley. I was able to sleep until around 3:40, when I was awakened by something scratching the ground outside our tent. I quickly woke my friend up, asking, "What the heck was that?" He groggily told me that it was probably a bear, because they had left some garbage on the ground. I went back to sleep, foolishly trusting my friend's explanation. I would wake up a couple more times before the sun rose, hearing more noises throughout the early morning. When we all woke up, we got out of the tent to find enormous scratch marks all over the ground surrounding our tent. It almost looked like it formed a big circle around our tent. And these were no ordinary marks. They were made up of 3 distinct lines going nearly 2 inches into the dry dirt. My friends decided to once again blame a bear, despite the trash being left alone and no visible bear tracks. While this spooked me, I knew that we were all larger guys, and we were armed with large knives. We had bought them as a joke for the trip, in case we ran into Bigfoot, but that's another story. We continued our day like the one before, going on long hikes throughout the park, enjoying our last full day there, before moving on to the next park. I don't know why we did this. I wish we hadn't done this. But before going to bed that night, we jokingly made Bigfoot calls to lure back whatever creature had bothered us the night before. We then scurried back into the tent and got into our sleeping bags, the way little kids do when they know they aren't supposed to be up during a sleepover, and hear a parent coming down the stairs. Anyway, the forest seemed particularly loud as we were trying to fall asleep. So many different bugs, so many little animals rustling through the brush nearby. It all seemed normal at the moment. However, I woke up around 1:45 to something very different. The entire forest had gone silent. Now I'd heard when the woods go silent, a predator is nearby. I chalked this up to being the bear from the night before paying us yet another visit. Hoping to catch a glimpse of this bear, I slowly unzipped the door with my flashlight aimed out towards the woods. That's when I saw it. This image still haunts me to this day. Standing only 10 feet away from our tent was a massive, pale creature. On all fours, it had to have been around 4.5 to 5 feet tall. It had grossly long arms with 3 sharp claws. To put it into perspective, one of its hands was next to a Bud Light bottle, and the claw was the same size. Thankfully, it was facing away at the time, so I quickly turned off my flashlight and re-zipped the tent. Silently, I awoke my friends, whispering to them what was going on as they slowly woke up. Obviously, none of them believed me, so they reached for their lights and reopened the door to the tent. Standing there, only 5 feet from the tent now, was that creature. This is when we saw its eyes. Huge, black eyes that felt as if they were looking through me, right into my soul. It stood there quietly, almost as if it was sizing us up, determining if we were worth the effort. Horrified, one of my friends made a quick movement to grab his knife. In response, the creature made a blood-curdling cry, revealing razor-sharp teeth. It leapt at the tent, landing on top, almost crushing us below. It began to wildly scratch at the tent, tearing it apart with mad fury. We scrambled to get out any way we could, hoping to escape our near-certain deaths. One of my friends and I were able to squeeze out through cuts in the tent, while the other 2 were still stuck inside, under the crushing weight of that thing. Now free, my friend and I knew that we'd have to get the creature away from the tent if we wanted our friends to survive. I quickly ran to the nearly dead fire, grabbing one of the few sticks still lit, in the hope of scaring it off. I sprinted at the creature with it, looking like a wild man with a torch. However, this only seemed to startle the creature. It took a few steps off of the tent, then stopped, as if first gathering itself before attacking again. My other 2 friends, still stuck in the tent, took this as an opportunity to get out, as there likely wouldn't be another. We all ran for the car as fast as we could, not looking back, slamming the door shut behind us. Right as the last car door shut, we felt the creature slam into the trunk of the SUV, shaking the entire car. It rammed the car a few more times before beginning to circle it, staring us down. Luckily, my friend had left his keys in the car. After all, we had been the only ones at the campsite. We were able to get it started. This also gave us a better view of the creature. Its off-white skin reflected the LED lights back at us. It was then that the scariest part of the whole experience happened. The creature slowly approached my door, taking cautious step after cautious step. I quickly locked my door and cowered in fear with my other friend in the back seat. As it got closer, it began to look directly at the handle. Then, steadily, it reached out its arm and stuck its claw in between the handle and the door, almost as if it had opened a car door before. It tried to pull the handle multiple times, getting angrier with each failed attempt. Luckily, at that moment, my friend who had been paralyzed with fear had snapped out of it and put the car in drive, flooring it. I've never seen anyone drive that fast in my life. We zipped through the roads as fast as we could, not even checking the rearview mirror to see if it was chasing us. We only stopped once we made it to Cody, Wyoming, needing to fill up our tank as we were running very low after such intense driving. Finally getting out, we looked at the damage, specifically the rear. The entire back hatch had been dented in several inches. I think this was when we realized how close we'd come to the creature killing us inside that car. One more good hit, and the trunk door would have fallen off, giving easy access to 4 tasty humans trapped in an aluminum can. We eventually made it back to our campus, where we split up, and we went our separate ways. I think the friend whose family owned that vehicle told his parents that a truck had pulled a hit and run or something along those lines to explain all the damage, but we all knew we couldn't tell anyone about the experience, or we'd be called liars or crazy. This was something that continues to haunt me to this day, and it's why I will never visit a national park again as long as I live. Take this story as a warning to avoid them unless you want to come face to face with a monster. October and December happenings. From Jade. October is said to be the month where the veil is the thinnest between us and the other side. Being a pagan, I believe in many gods, stories, and believe this statement to be very true. I live in Virginia near the mountains, and the property I live on is small but nice. There are plenty of strange stories I could tell you, but I'll settle for a few that happened in October of 2021 and October and December of 2020. The first story was told to me by one of my friends. For context, we've always felt like there was something around my house and the farmlands around it. Between my sister having been outside and hearing knocking sounds that grew near her, and my brother hearing things outside at night, we think it's something not friendly. They say calling it by its name brings it closer. Maybe this is payback for the time I said it so freely as an atheist. Too many strange things happen for me to stay one, though. For now, though, I call them not deer and tailless things. On Halloween night of 2020, I was having fun, working at a local haunt that has since been closed down. The place was easy to keep going, because we required no contact with people, as they would be pretend zombies that were shot at by Nerf bullets and all that. My friends and I decided to do the haunt together, though Mal had an asthma attack and we had to leave early. Upon trying to leave, we noticed the full moon in the sky, and around it was a ring, like a snake biting its tail sort of ring. Now, as pagans, we could only think of it as an omen. After all, it was Halloween, with a full moon, with a symbol in the sky. Many theories range from Norse, alchemic, or Native American, but all pointed to one thing: a bad omen. We pushed it to the back of our minds, and they drove me home for the night. I told them to be careful while leaving. It was a foggy night, and around the mountains, deer like to jump out in front of people. With that, we exchanged goodbyes and hugs before I went inside to warm up and clean up. I didn't know it at the time, but our bad omen was true in a way. Mal told me a few weeks later, admitting he didn't want to scare me that night, but on the drive out of my area on the back road, something jumped out in front of my friends. My current friend with them said it was lanky, tall, running on all fours, with pale skin. She didn't see the features in detail, as Mal swerved to miss it and floored it out of there. Later that night, they all cleansed their rooms before bed. The next story is one my grandmother told me. I call her my mom because she raised me. Now, my grandmother is an evangelical Christian, a strict one at that. She doesn't believe our house is haunted or cursed in any way, and she's a firm believer that this house is blessed, despite all the things that have happened to her in it. This might have changed that. It was late, nearing November of 2021, just at the tail end of October. Important to note, my sleep schedule is not the best. Needless to say, and I quote from one of my favorite streamers, "Usually my sleep schedule gets destroyed and it alternates every week." So this was why I didn't see this, but she did. One morning, my grandmother, aka Mom, asked me if anything strange happened the night before. I was only up to about 11 p.m., but I do remember something happening. Knocking sounds at the door 3 times. My brother heard it too and looked at me wide-eyed in terror. There shouldn't have been anyone at the door at that time. My sister was already home and it was late. Then there were 3 more knocks after that, and we just stared at the door. I am superstitious as it is, and according to stories, 3 knocks means something wants to be let inside. I steeled myself and said firmly, "You're not welcome inside." And after that, no more knocking. I shrugged it off but told Mom we heard knocking last night while she slept. She stared at me, saying, "Something strange happened to me early in the morning. The sun near our house doesn't fully illuminate things until after 7, but just before 5:30, you can see shapes and outlines well enough." She told me she was sitting near the living room window, looking outside like she always does, across the field, when something bright began to fall from the sky. She said it was like an orb of fire, and fell into the field, hovering, before darting to her. It took my mom a moment to react, and in the time she thought to react, it just vanished into thin air. No trace of it at all. It spooked her. She wasn't sure what it was, but I told her strange things have always happened around here. She just stared at me, and I left as my stepdad talked with her about some things he knew. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.